Welcome to Imico's weekly webinar. Kathy's out again this week, so I'm here with Emma. Emma Park is a functional nutritionist, clinician based on the Mornington Peninsula in Victoria, which is in Australia. Through her role in clinical practice, community health education, and as a clinical educator for Pure Medic, Emma is an industry leader in the field of gut health and the microbiome. Emma's passion for education sees her routinely present to groups regarding nutrition, gut health, the microbiome and its role in general health, wellness, and healthy aging, as well as fertility, pregnancy, lactation, and pediatrics. Emma is also the founder of the first 1,000 Days Education Program, an online education resource about gut health and the microbiome from conception to 2 years old. She also has programs for parents as well as accredited education for health professionals working in maternity care and pediatrics. Welcome, Emma.
Thanks for having me.
It's lovely to have you here today. I was just chatting with Emma a little bit earlier about some of the accredited courses that she has coming through for health professionals, and it sounds absolutely incredible, really important stuff. Emma, would you mind just starting out by telling us a little bit about the importance of the microbiome in the first 1,000 days, or the microbiome in general, I guess, if you'd like to start there?
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think most people are quite familiar, especially health professionals, with, the microbiome and what it is. But generally, it's all the bugs that live in and on us. And it's not just bacteria, it's also, viruses and parasites and those kind of things, but predominantly bacteria. And it is an organism of itself, and it interrelates with the host which is the human host. And it has a very regulatory role in the health and function of the human, and the generally discussed in context of the gut, because that's where the greatest concentration lives. But all body sites have their own microbiome. And when we're looking into sort of reproduction and that first 1,000 days stage, which is conception to 2 years old, it's the foundation stage. It's very relatable to outcomes in those stages. Again, it's that role of health and function of the different body sites. So I guess it's been getting a lot more attention and research in medicine in the last probably decade or longer, but really we first discovered it when we were sequencing the human genome, and back in the 80s, 90s, 80s it was, and they discovered all this genetic material that wasn't human. So then once we figured out that we had 22,000 human genes, there was all of this other material that was mostly bacterial. At that time, the count was about, I think, 8 million or something, and now it's up to like 48 million genes that aren't human, that are living in and on us and having interactions with our human genes and our, metabolic system, our hormones, all of our regulatory processes. Really, really big interaction with the immune system and the inflammatory cascade. Again, one of these kind of things, when we start to talk about probiotics, you can see how they could be helpful. If we have and the other thing about microbiome is the term microbiome is also talking about the genetic material. You'll see terms like microflora and microbiota, and that's actually talking about the bugs themselves. But when we're discussing microbiome, it's all that genetic material too.
It's a really interesting distinction.
Yeah. And then I guess the first 1,000 days stage, and again, that sort of counting conception to the 2 years old is that foundation stage. So for the infant, essentially that colonization, there's some evidence that there's a placental microbiome, or that there's a beginning of a colonization in utero. That's quite a contentious issue in the global research. There's some groups that say, yes, there is some crossover. Others that say that babies are born sterile or until the labour process and the birth canal exposure, or in a C-section, obviously that the lack of that, and then in the theatre.
Yeah.
But there's new evidence now about the reproductive microbiome and how much that's influencing. And even if there isn't actually colonization happening, it's still definitely influeing everything from fertility to fetal growth and development and pregnancy outcomes and birth outcomes, and then, breastfeeding, and then looking at growth and development of the infant, and then origins of disease and lifetime disease outcomes. So it's pretty amazing. The role that it plays, in this, it's especially pregnancy and lactation, but then, all of that lifetime disease stuff.
Yeah, the foundations of lifetime good health, really, isn't it? It's really important foundational health stuff. Yeah,
absolutely. The origins of health, that there's a lot of research going into that now, and some really great studies globally about following the microbiome from all through pregnancy, and then following the kids up until, there's one in Canada, the Canada Child Study, that they're up to 12 years old now.
Right.
Got some really good data about pregnancy health, especially like birth mode, formula exposure, breastfeeding versus, formula, lack of breastfeeding, all of these different things, antibiotic exposure, those kind of things. There's a study going on in Australia at the moment, the Mothers Babies studies in Sydney. They're actually looking at preconception microbiome and then following the kids through, all pregnancy outcomes, and then also following the kids through, ideally until, adolescence. They're hoping to, which is that's a global first. That model is actually looking at preconception microbiome and how that's impacting fertility and then pregnancy. So that's going to be a really fascinating one as well. So anyone working with mums in Australia, they're recruiting at the moment the Mothers Baby studies. Can we put links in to
absolutely, please do.
So they're because they're trying to get people from preconception, it's more difficult to recruit. So they're working, with IVF doctors and anyone working in fertility that can get, and so they'll be testing the microbiome every 3 months all the way through, which is great.
Okay, well, if you could send us a link after the webinar, we'll pop it up on the Imico Facebook page, and hopefully we can get it out there for
they're wanting to get a big, obviously, a big cohort, which can be challenging, but they've got some so they're already having some babies that have come through, so it's good.
Fantastic. Can't wait to see that data.
It's going to be amazing. And if you are a practitioner working with a mum, you actually can have access to the data. So it would just be raw clinical data. So if you're not familiar with microbiome testing, you need to be able to interpret it, but be out still having the raw data. It's going to be really great, give some great insights.
Great. So what are some other clinical insights around the microbiome, pregnancy, infancy, breastfeeding?
I think probably, so for quite a while we've known about the pregnancy microbiome and how that can relate to pregnancy outcomes, like things like gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, bacterial vaginosis, and so preterm birth and early membrane rupture, which has a bacterial vaginosis, which is a vaginal microbiome issue. So then the others, like GDM particularly, is more related to the gut microbiome issue. Preeclampsia, which is obviously a hypertension state, can be more related to the oral microbiome. So all of these, so what it is actually when there's what we call an imbalance in the microbiome is dysbiosis. So dysbiosis in any of those body sites causes an endotoxic load, and also inflammation. And really that's the mechanism behind all of the issues it's creating in the body, is the fact that, so if you imagine an oral microbiome issue where there's membrane permeability, the same thing that's happening in the gut when you've got leaky gut from increased membrane permeability. So you're getting this increase of the toxins coming into the system, and then you're getting, and particularly in the mucosal system and in the gut, you've got that's where your immune system is, so you're setting off that inflammatory cascade. So that's all a part of healing if it's just in an acute form, but when we've got it in a chronic form, then it's putting a real strain and stress on the whole system. So really that it's that mechanism of increasing cytokine activity, increasing inflammatory molecules and pathways in the body, and then that can affect the whole system. So again, that's why you can see it related to pretty much any of those, negative outcomes or adverse pregnancy outcomes can have a microbiome issue at the core of it. Vaginal microbiome dysbiosis, we know, again, you can get that ascending infection, and that can be one of the we know that bacterial vaginosis is a like one of the most it's really quite likely related to early membrane rupture and preterm birth. There's another study going on in Sydney actually where they're using a probiotic, because currently the treatment if you've got early membrane rupture is antibiotics to try and prevent infection. And so they're using a probiotic as well to see if they can prevent or delay the delivery. So there's some really good research going on. Again, we know we've kind of been across that again, I think, with pregnancy. Now we're looking more at the research into the reproductive microbiome. There's some amazing stuff going on in that space. Actually saw Tasha Jennings recently. She's from Melbourne. I know she's been on this webinar before. She works in the fertility space. Yeah. And she works with a lot of IVF specialists in Melbourne. And she said they're very aware of the microbiome now. Like a lot of them are testing, a lot of the more holistic ones or integrated are testing the vagina microbiome and, looking for infection. And one of the problems I think with that, and this is what she was saying as well, is if they see infection, they just bomb with antibiotics and then try and improve implantation that way. Whereas we sort of look at it like, well, why is there infection? Like what's missing? And infection is just an overgrowth of bad bugs, right? So it's like there's usually, when in that case, then there's going to be your good bugs missing. So it's like, rather than just kill, and this is the way we've worked with any kind of infection over the last 100 years, right? One of the reasons we've got so many problems with our microbiome is that we just see all pathogens as, as problematic and causing disease, whereas some of them are pathobionts. We know that they're just problematic if they're overgrown. So, so we kind of try and look at it with in a more holistic way of restoring the microbiome rather than just wiping everything out and then going from there. Because antibiotics is one of the things that's it's one of the major things that's caused the destruction of the microbiome on a pretty big scale. The other things are obviously just our modern life diet, our modern diet, the standard Australian diet, standard Western diet, very unhealthy, it's just lacking all of the things that feeds a good bug. So we've got low fiber, low nutrients, high processed stuff, high sugar, high alcohol consumption. Ideally not in our pregnancy and breastfeeding mums, but earlier, if there has been that in our history, definitely in Australia, we have a culture of binge drinking, that really impacts other medications like acid inhibitors. So our reflux drugs, really major impacts to the microbiome because they suppress acid in the stomach. And one of the roles of acid in the stomach is to kill pathogens coming in this way. So then they get to pass through and set up in the small intestine, and that has a real big problem. So most of the bugs in the gut are supposed to live in the large bowel, and when we have issues that can cause colonization in the small intestine, which remember is where most of our immune system is sitting, that's really problematic. So that's a condition called SIBO. Some practitioners would be familiar with that. It's definitely something that we are aware of more now, even in mainstream medicine. And we know that SIBO is a big cause of IBS. Like 70% of people with IBS have got SIBO, right? So it's all this imbalance in the microbiome being either too many of the bad bugs or even just the bugs in the wrong spot, which is what we see in SIBO. And so I think more the recent research in the reproductive stage is really looking into that preconception and the reproductive microbiome, as in cervical microbiome, uterine microbiome, vaginal microbiome. We know the most about the vagina microbiome because it's the easiest to test. The other things are, obviously we're seeing samples that are taken from surgery and those kind of things, which is really, it's going to be skew the research to people that have got already predetermined conditions. Whereas the vagina microbiome, we're getting a better database of what that looks like. And then even the things that are the compatibility between the seminal microbiome and the cervical microbiome is coming up, is that has that really big influence over fertility. Isn't that amazing? Like
it's incredible.
we didn't even know this stuff a decade ago.
No.
We didn't even know about the seminal microbiome till really a few years ago. And again, clinically, we don't really have these tools yet that we can access easily. Like different countries, in the UK, they have a good company that does these testing and that you can access, and it's getting more affordable. More in Australia, it's more difficult because we're sending it overseas. So,
yeah,
you know, the delay in getting the results back can be problematic. There is a new test that naturopaths are doing in Australia. If it's coming. Anyway, it's what I'm saying. It's coming, but we definitely know about vagina microbiome. We definitely know that if we've got clients that are presenting with issues with their vagina microbiome, like recurring bacterial vaginosis or thrush or GBS in previous pregnancies or something like that, that's an indication that we've got vagina microbiome dysbiosis. So if you're seeing that in preconception, well, that's an obvious. If they've got gut dysbiosis or oral dysbiosis, that's going to create that inflammatory response in the body. And then that's the thing that then can drive all the other conditions as well. So, and I guess the other area of research that's very dynamic, and we're seeing a lot more coming through, is in that infant microbiome space, and then how that's relating to those disease outcomes, like we were talking about earlier, those origins of disease, So that the Canadian child study, they're seeing some fascinating stuff. The early microbiome, so the early infant microbiome, talking about the first 6 weeks, the first 12 weeks, that even if there's some formula exposure in that time, that's increasing the risk of things like allergy, asthma and obesity in a 12-year-old, even one formula exposure. So it's not just lack of breastfeeding that's having this big problem. It's not just antibiotics that are having problems in this. Birth interventions are huge. Like I know the stats in Australia, like we've got over 50% induction rate, we're creeping up to 50% C-section rate. It's pretty crazy. And then when we look at GBS and we look at antibiotics in pregnancy for recurring UTIs, then we look at antibiotics in infancy and breastfeeding for things like mastitis. It's pretty crazy, that intervention. It's and again, we've also probably got mums that have coming in that have already been exposed to antibiotics or other things in their childhood, or they've had a C-section, C-section delivery, right? So there's this compromised microbiome coming in the first place, which is potentially causing those pregnancy adverse outcomes. And then there's more intervention and more antibiotics, then that impacts breastfeeding, and bonding and all of those things. And then we're seeing so many problems with the infant and that developing microbiome. So that early stage all the way up to 2 years old, or actually what causes the maturation of the infant microbiome in this foundation stage for them is the cessation of breastfeeding, because breastfeeding has got its own prebiotics and its own probiotics, and as among of all the other components of breast milk, it really has it's the biggest influence over the developing microbiome. So when we see kids with problems, one of the first things we do in our first line approaches, I go, oh, you must be reacting to breast milk. Like a lot of peds now are recommending to mums to change their diet and those kind of things first before just swapping to formula. But there's a lot of babies going on to hydrolyzed collagen formulas and those kind of things,
which we're finding out is not good for the development of allergies.
Right. So again, it's like, as practitioners working with mums, we've got to consider all of these things, right? And the earlier we get them, the better, because there's so much you can do with diet and lifestyle to improve the microbiome.
Absolutely.
For mums, so much you can do with diet and lifestyle. And then let's talk about probiotics, actually, because they're so important in this stage and they're so helpful. So there's prebiotics and there's probiotics. We'll talk about both because they're really important. Prebiotics are the things that feed the live bugs, and the probiotics are the live bugs. So as adults, we get our prebiotics from our plant fibers in our diet, the things that our human digestive enzymes don't break down, so they pass through and then they feed the bugs in the gut. As babies, in a physiological process, they would be breastfed, and the breast milk's got its own prebiotics, the human milk oligosaccharides, the HMOs. One of my favorite things of anything that humans do is make HMOs. They're just so amazing of all the mechanisms that they have. They can prevent pathogen adherence. They act as decoys to pathogens. They help they're anti-inflammatory. They make those butyrate bugs. They help the tight junctions in it. So they're really part of the development of a healthy microbiome, but also the development of the immune system in the infant. And it's not just the immune system. We always talk about how babies are born with immature digestive and immune systems, but all their systems are immature. Their central nervous system, is immature. Their skeletal and muscular system. So it's, that process of feeding personalized medicine, which is what breast milk is, it's moderating all of those processes and helping that establishment of the microbiome with the pre and probiotics in it. So I think I've gone off track. What was I talking about? Prebiotics. I go down rabbit holes because there's so much information that I want to share.
Because it's so fascinating. The microbiome is such a big and interesting topic.
I know, right?
Go for
I'll
it.
try and keep it succinct for everyone.
I do have a message here from Josie. Okay. She's saying, it's so fascinating, but I'm finding it a wee bit hard to keep up with writing my notes. Is there any chance we could talk a bit slower?
Oh, I know, Josie. I do talk fast. Do you know what? I will slow down. There's also some other education modules that you can access as well that go through all of this in great detail. I was talking to it's Julie, not Kathy.
Julie, that's right.
Things coming up as Kathy, it's throwing me.
I know.
No, so there's some education modules that you can access, and they're accredited. There's a few different options of how to do that, and we can put that in the show notes as well. But that's got all of this information, and it's recorded webinar, so you can pause me and and then I'll start up again. I will slow down though. So the prebiotics in breast milk is the HMOs. The probiotics in breast milk is the actual live bacteria. So the theory behind how the probiotics are getting into the breast milk is this enteromammary circulation, so that the dendritic cells select the bugs, the live bugs, and take them into the breast milk in preparation for breastfeeding. So this starts in third trimester, but then it's happening through the whole process because of the spit back reflex with the baby feeding at the breast. So this is another major fascinating area of research. I've been looking at this in preemie babies, is that feeding at the breast, as opposed to even just feeding, express breast milk from that mother baby dyad, or donor milk, like actually feeding at the breast has so much, has a much more protective or beneficial effect on that baby's microbiome. But again, we've got to think about what's happening with the mums, like that in a healthy physiological pregnancy and spontaneous labor, and then the breast call and a naturally baby-led attachment, that kind of stuff, then you're going to get all of those kind of processes happening as they would. But because of all these interventions, we've got a compromised birth experience or birth trauma. We've got separation. You're not getting that golden hour. You're not getting the baby-led attachment. They're not getting colostrum sometimes, So all of these things are going to impact. But ideally, if we can support better breastfeeding outcomes, and then support the microbiome in the breast milk, and then just be breastfeeding for longer, then we can. So the prebiotics, so for naturally found in breast milk, but mum's diet and lifestyle impacts those prebiotics, those HMOs. So she needs to be having a plant-based diet. This is the thing, we need to eat lots of prebiotics in our diet, lots of diversity in our plant foods. So we know that a healthy microbiome, particularly in the gut, which is the biggest reservoir, is a healthy microbiome is a diverse microbiome. So we get a diverse microbiome by eating a diverse diet. So we tend to not have that in the standard Australian diet, with our plant foods. And it's not just fruit and veggies, it's nuts, seeds, herbs, spices, whole grains and legumes and pulses. They're all plant foods, and they all have these, prebiotic fibers in them. So we want to make sure mums are eating them. And then for babies, we want them to be breastfeeding. And if not, some of the formulas have actually got better prebiotics than others. So again, if you want more info on that, you can go and do one of those other education modules, because we go through all of that stuff. But probiotics are really important as well. So there's a few different probiotic strains. So the thing about probiotics is they're not all the same. So it's right. So probiotics are named by genus, species, and strain. So everyone's familiar with Lactobacillus acidophilus, right? That's the yogurt one.
Yep.
But then there's also like the little numbers and letters that come after that, and that's the strain. And there's many, many Lactobacillus acidophilus, but there's only a couple that have been researched to be clinically effective when you put them in the body. And the thing with the probiotic industry is it's not very well regulated. Like, you don't even have to put that strain on the bottle. It's in Australia, I'm not sure about other countries, but it's pretty loose. Like, it's not very well. The quality is not, so what we're looking for in probiotics is really good, proven clinical research. We know that the strain that we're using is what's in the bottle. And we also need to look at good manufacturing, and good quality products, especially when we're looking at these foundation stage use. It's really important. So the number one thing we're looking at, make sure the actual strain that you're getting, and that it's what's in the bottle. So you're looking for those letters and numbers being written on the product.
Yep, that identifies
it. Quality, so you want to have a reputable brand, something that and that has some clinical research behind it. And then we're looking for the mechanism of action that's been proven, right? So probiotics, a good quality probiotic has many mechanisms of action. And then we were talking about at the start about inflammation and that, immune stimulation and stuff. So good probiotics do lots of different things. One of the things they do is reduce inflammation in the gut and wherever, they're going around the body. Some of them travel around the body. Some of them tend to stay in the gut. That's another thing, especially when we're looking at things for breastfeeding outcomes. We want probiotics that are actually going to get into the breast milk. We want them to be able to do things like increase secretory IgA, protective, help to increase the mucus lining in the gut. So they can do all these things. They're quite amazing, good probiotics. So we want to be looking for clinical research. Again, there's some modules that go through all the different strains and tells you the strains. There's some good stuff for atopy and allergy prevention, but that needs to be given from third trimester all the way through. That's Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG. People may have heard of this strain because we call that, I call it the allergy strain, because it was one used in the peanut trial. If you're not familiar with the peanut trial, it's where the kids were anaphylaxis to peanuts. These are older kids, right? So they were already presenting with really, anaphylaxis, immune responses to peanut antigen. So they delivered the peanut antigen with this probiotic in small doses at the beginning and increasing, and 80% of the kids became non-reactive.
That's amazing.
So, I know. So this is retraining the immune system.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, if we can retrain the immune system, after the microbiome and that training foundation stages happened, if we're getting the right bugs in those early training stages, and we're going to be able to use it as a preventative. So again, that's why I like Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG. I think it's got the most evidence around that allergy and prevention. Another one is Lactobacillus rhamnosus HN001. Again, anyone can email me with this information. I'm happy to send it out, or I'll send them the links to the other webinars, because we need to all know this stuff. HN001 is good for some food allergy stuff. They're looking at some longer term studies with that. Also good for postnatal depression. So that's another one I use if I can get it. At the moment, because of COVID, a lot of supplements are out of stock because they're just having issues getting ingredients and those things. That's been really challenging. So we're using what we can. GBS. So GBS is a transient infection, right, in the vagina or in the colon as well. So if most people would be familiar in the audience with what GBS is.
I would think so.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Group B
strep. And so in Australia, I know most of them, they routinely swab for it, and if you test positive, you get a lot of antibiotics. And
be the source of a lot of birth intervention.
Yeah, it would be. So with all my clients, I'll make sure they're on the right probiotics then from third trimester to make sure that GBS isn't present, or that they've got enough of the good guys that they're confident enough to decline the antibiotics. There's some really good new research coming through around that as well, about what best practice looks like with GBS. And it's not necessarily the antibiotic intervention, as not considering the long-term outcomes of that. So there's some good strains that you can get that are good for the vagina microbiome as well. That's like, I can't, like, off the top of my head, you won't remember them anyway, but again, just email me and I'll send you through exactly what they are. But you can get them globally. And it's a 2-strain connection, and it's a 2-strain combination for GBS, and that's got some really good research. Again, I can send that research out. Then, so I said the atopy, that, and then the breast milk strain, the Lactobacillus fermentum C CT5716, really, really good evidence for breastfeeding outcomes, particularly with mastitis, but also just all the other breastfeeding outcomes. And one of the keys to the difference in that strain is maternal transfer, because it actually gets into breast milk. So not many strains have shown to get into breast milk, like the Rhamnosus GG. That is the one we call the allergy. So it works on that antibody and immune response via mum, but it doesn't actually seem to show up in breast milk and then pass on to the baby, which this breast milk strain does, which makes sense. Like, it's an isolated breast milk strain, where some of the others are isolated from bowel flora or even from food, like from yogurts and things. So breast milk strain probiotics are relatively new in the, clinical application stage. And they're showing some really, really good good benefits, lots and lots of different mechanisms of action you talked about before, which also makes sense with breast milk strains, because it's one of the foundation strains that is going to be having a really beneficial influence over the immune system.
I'm interested in what you think about using combinations of probiotics. So I know that there's a little bit of a divide.
Definitely. So originally with probiotics, 30, 40 years ago, it was as many strains as you could get, put them all in together, bomb the gut, recolonize with supplemental probiotics. They just don't do that. We know now they don't work like that. That the times that you see side effects or, adverse effects of probiotics is all these multi-strain stuff. And so the thing is, they're live organisms, and just putting them all in together and assuming they're going to do the same thing as testing one in clinical, like in a clinical trial, that they're just going to go and behave like that. So they don't do that. So we've really moved away from these multi-strain big dose products. They're still around and it still gets marketed like that, but you definitely will see all of the reputable products, the practitioner brands, they've all moved into using single or double strains, and they're the ones that have been tested in clinical, proven to have clinical effectiveness, to being safe, to being used at low doses. We don't use big doses anymore. Like, you just don't need to. And when you're looking at things like a lactobacillus, for example, that group in an adult microbiome is 0.5 to 1%. It's not a big group. It's just very active. It has a very, so doesn't make sense to put in a whole bunch of that one, and you're going to throw the other ones out. So what we look at is those mechanisms of action, and the fact that they look after the ecosystem. So they make a beneficial environment for the indigenous flora to come back. And I think that's one of the difference with breast milk strains, because one of their roles in that foundation stage is just to keep a healthy ecosystem and then allow the prebiotics to feed. Because in an infant microbiome, it's bifido-dominant, like those HMOs feed the bifido family. So in the first 6 months in an exclusively breastfed infant, their microbiome is bifido-dominant, and that's one group. And that's for a reason, right? That's in the training stage. So what we see in babies that have had formula exposure or not, absence of, insufficient breast milk, is they have this greater diversity earlier. The formulas have a lot of free sugars and those kind of things in them. So they're just, it's different. Like I said, that cessation of breastfeeding is what triggers the maturation of the infant microbiome. So imagine a healthy microbiome mum, a physiological labor, a vaginal birth, goes on to breastfeeds exclusively to 6 months, and then continues to breastfeed to 3 or more, which is what we would have done, or longer. You can imagine that the development and the protective role that the breast milk would have for the baby's developing immune system compared to what we're doing now. So understandably why we're seeing so many, immune issues, and there's so many kids with allergies and these, all of those kind of things. So it's not just birth intervention and lack of breastfeeding. There's a lot of other things we've got to consider, like, environmental toxins and stress and, all of those things that happen. We know stress has huge impacts on pregnancy outcomes and origins of disease. Absolutely. So that's another thing to consider too. Stress has big impacts on the gut microbiome, would you believe? So it's like it's all tied in together, like they're not independent of each other. They're all sort of, working.
Yeah.
Working together, and the microbiome is a real regulator.
Really is its own big ecosystem.
Yeah.
Being fed by all the different systems in the body.
Yeah, lots of different things. It's like, imagine it like a rainforest, really, and it's not just the actual, trees and shrubs that are growing, it's the whole ecosystem of it, and how it supports the health of itself and each other, and then how that then feeds the earth, right? This is the body, if you imagine that's it like that. And it really is sort of, a bit of mass destruction that's gone on in the last few generations. But it's also, a new frontier of medicine, because the more we understand it, like in a decade we'll probably have poo banks. Well, there's already poo banks.
We do have them.
So for now that they're using that fecal transplants for things like C. diff infection, we know that that's a life-saving procedure if you've got C. diff, which is where your microbiome's annihilated and you've got Colostrum difficile, which is the hospital bug overgrowing, and it's resistant to any antibiotics and it kills people. So they do a fecal transplant of a healthy microbiome, which is at this point of the time, it comes from a donor that's got lack of disease markers, and they've got good diversity. That's how we're looking at it now. But they're starting to use fecal transplants for all sorts of other stuff as well, and getting amazing results, like kids with autism and Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's and stuff like that. So at the moment we don't have the technology to individualize it, so we're just trying to and people even with mental health diseases. There was a case of this girl with bipolar that used her partner's stool and did her own fecal transplant. Not that I recommend that anyone, but it's amazing what we're gonna, for the potential benefits that we're going to be able to personalize this kind of microbiome medicine.
It's an incredible area to watch out for.
Yeah, it's really good. So I was going to talk a little bit more about the research around that breast milk strain, if that's okay.
Please do.
Again, forgot the disclosure at the start that I do the clinical education for the company that makes the breast milk strain, the Lactobacillus fermentum CT5716. That's also why I know so much about it. And there's in the education, it's just about, we just look at the strains. We look at all of the strains that have got clinical research for effectiveness in this life stage. So it is unbiased education, but I am the clinical educator.
I'll just say that the product name is Chiara. So a lot of our listeners may recognize that product. Yeah,
cool. So that's available in Australia, but potentially more, they're looking at more than that. Really, really good clinical research. It came out of Spain, they Australian, when they were looking at breast milk flora and seeing what the roles it was doing. And then so the Prebiotics, the company in Australia, took the research and brought the product to market. And it was the first, one of the first breast milk strains to come out available for clinical, applications. And the research was around mastitis, treatment and prevention. So the first trial, which was back in 2010, all of the mums in that trial had mastitis, and they gave an antibiotic or this probiotic, and they had it was as effective. Actually, I think it was more effective, the probiotic, and it had less recurrence and no side effects. So we know with antibiotics what can happen is it can kill the pathogen, but then it can leave antibiotic resistant pathogens, and then so sometimes that can be enough for the mum's immune system to take over and restore a lot of the time you get that mastitis antibiotics. Mastitis just comes back again. You know, when mums get on that cycle, they stop breastfeeding, you know, like, or they end up with abscesses, and it can be very bad, right? So what the probiotic does, and this is again with most good probiotics, they can suppress pathogens and allow the, you know, the indigenous flora to come back, and then the immune system can rebalance itself. So it's almost like a selective antibiotic, because it suppresses the pathogen but encourages the good guys to grow back. And again, the good quality strains, most of them can do this. The thing about this breast milk strain is it actually gets into breast milk. So we know that it's really good for, you know, not just mastitis, but all the other outcomes. The next study that looked at this strain was in breast pain. So they looked at mums that had breast pain, no infection, and they had an increased staph load. So we do see with mastitis quite often the infective pathogen is Staph aureus or Staph epidermidis, which is the skin one, epidermidis, which you see a lot more when there's nipple trauma and that kind of stuff. So that, you know, the skin one's getting in. That tends to be the one that causes the chronic mastitis or the recurring mastitis. The Staph aureus is a natural part of breast milk, but again, it's a pathobiont, so it can just be problematic if it overgrows. But this study looked at breast pain, so they had an increased staph load, so they gave the probiotic, and again, this is a really interesting one at looking at dosing. They gave 3 billion, 6 billion, and 9 billion, which is still technically low when you're looking at those big products that are selling 30 bazillion or whatever they're saying.
20 billion is pretty common,
standard, right? So this is 3, 6, and 9, and there was an increase that it all brought down all the staph loads, all the pain scores, you know, within a few days. There was an increase in efficacy in the 6 or 9 million. So there wasn't a reason to increase that efficacy. In that first trial, the dose they did was 1.5 billion. So it still worked to treat the mastitis at that. Right. And then the next trial on the Chiara strain was the prevention trial. So this was the mums that had antibiotics in the context of childbirth, so within 48 hours, and they took I think they used 3 billion in this one, and it was a reduced incidence of mastitis by 55%. Oh, I haven't talked about this research for, I think it was quite, you know, an independent intervention of just giving the probiotic, not even looking at the other diet and lifestyle things that reduced the incidence, I should say, reduced the incidence by 55%. So imagine if we were doing all of the other things as well. And that also was just starting that at the birth stage. So I've always put my mums on it from 3rd trimester, or if there's a history of mastitis or anything else like that, even earlier, because there's no reason not to. There's no side effects. The only thing is cost, because obviously, you know, like, and this product is a bit more than the other ones, but it's because of that, the quality, the manufacture. It's got no excipients in it. It's in a sachet, that kind of stuff. So, the
data, the research, the clinical research.
Yeah, exactly. And hundreds of case studies, like seriously, hundreds of case studies that actually show the effectiveness, and lots of data to say, you know, not that it's written up, but actually looking at doing that, because there's a lot of health professionals that see it just works better than the other probiotics a lot of the time. Do we have time to do a case study that I can run through?
We can do a case study.
Cool. So I'll just tell you about Justine. This is a mum who she had a physiological birth. She had no history of mastitis, but then she got it, I think, quite early at 4 weeks, and she had 4 courses of all the heavy duty oral antibiotics, and as soon as it would finish the antibiotic, the mastitis would flare overnight. She ended up back in hospital on IV antibiotics, and with an abscess, I think. And then her OB had said, oh, listen, I've heard about this. This is probably 10 years ago, I reckon now, or maybe not quite that long. I've heard about this probiotic. It's got some good research. May as well just try it. So she started taking it in hospital while she was still on the IV antibiotics. And then she was able to, it just never came back. Like, it broke that cycle of the antibiotics, and heaps of stories like that. So again, it's like it's that mechanism of action of being able to get into the breast milk, even when there's IV antibiotics going on, which is great.
Yeah.
So we do say that if mums are on antibiotics, or if they do need the antibiotics, or if they already take them, that you still dose the probiotic, but you just have it 2 hours away from the oral dose.
Yep.
Plenty of cases where mums have been prescribed antibiotics but have chosen to take the probiotic first, just to see if they can avoid the antibiotics. Heaps of cases of that.
Yep.
We have some mums that need to take 2 sachets a day because their dysbiosis in their breast milk, I think, is so bad that, or their immune system isn't strong enough to repair itself. They do better on 2 doses. We do say if someone's got a aggressive infection, or if they've already had antibiotics, to go up to 2 sachets a day just in the beginning. Once everything settles down, you can just go back to that 1 sachet a day.
Taper it off.
Yeah.
Okay. And do you suggest
as
that
a
people...
preventative?
That was my question. Sorry.
What was your question going to be?
It was, how do you use it as a preventative, and is it something that people should be on all the time, or just something that you bring out at particular times?
I will put, if there's any history, I'll put mums on it from early in pregnancy. We know the mammary tissue starts developing at 7 weeks. So it's like, if we've got that maternal transfer, so it's getting into the breast tissue, then it's going to be beneficial in that whole growth and development phase. All of those things it does, like reducing inflammation, that's a really important role for all of that development. Really good for preventing blocked ducts and blebs and all those kind of things. So I'll put mums on it from 32 weeks if they haven't had any history or any problems in the history. If they're all healthy and all that, 32 weeks, no problem. I even can start them on 1 sachet 3 times a week, because again, it's got that 3 billion CFU in it, and we know it's even effective at 1.5. So if for cost, I'll just bring it down to sort of 3 times a week in that, as long as they're healthy. Yep. If they've got any issues, then you go at that 1 sachet from 20 weeks or even earlier. Some mums really have had such good results with it that they'll just take it for as soon as they get pregnant. Or it even would be good for a conception one, because we know it's that lactobacilli that gets all around the body. So we know it's got that really, really effective at that low dose of reducing inflammation systemically, which is a really, really good benefit. So we haven't got any actual clinical research for this strain, as in Vagina microbiome, which is a real shame. I'd love to do some stuff like that, because I think these breast milk strains have got really good systemic effects. It's common sense, right? Because it's like having a systemic effect on the infant. Even things like we've seen it have amazing results in elderly chronic diarrhea, or kids going through cancer treatment, like fungal infections and atopic diseases and eczema presentations and stuff. So it's like some of these strains have a really good effect, and there's other strains that have got that good clinical research. But what I love about the Chiara one is the quality, the cleanliness. It's only got 1 excipient. It doesn't even have a capsule. So some of the others, you look up the TGA list of excipients and they've got heaps of stuff in them. They've got corn, soy, gluten, all of these things that are causing potential problems in this stage, this allergy development stage. And what we're seeing, these poor babies that have got CMPI and their mums are on these really limited diets, and they're just, and then they're stressed because they feel like they're doing something wrong, and then that increases the problems, and then they've got a ped or someone else hanging over them going, you have to stop breastfeeding, and that just makes that worse. And so it's like really good evidence around colic and reflux, and that having a microbiome issue behind it. There's a company in Australia that do a colic mix, Wilby's. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but
Wilby's.
They collect their data, right? They've got some really good data about, they use Chiara as a companion product for their babies. So if the babies have got colic, they use, and they're breastfeeding, they use the breastfeeding one. If they're formula feeding, they give the colic mix plus the Chiara infant, which is the purple box, which is a dose for infants. Ideally, we get it early. We get mums on it early, and that we're using it as a preventative, and we have good outcomes. Best outcome, we say, is nothing. Everything works well.
Absolutely.
And there's no problems. But the Wilby's people are obviously getting their cohort a bad colic babies. So they've been collecting the data, and they see that they get better results with the Chiara strain than any of the other strains. There's a Biogaia, which people will be familiar with. That is a breast milk strain. Off the top of my head, I can't remember what it's called. Lactobacillus reuteri, it's the one. It is a breast milk strain. It's been genetically modified a little bit. I kind of go, that's a negative for me. The other thing is it's produced by Nestle, which makes me a bit dubious about quality. But, if it works, it works. It does have some good evidence for preventing infection in babies' guts that are on Nexium and Losec, but it doesn't have very good evidence for colic. It just doesn't. It reduced crying time by an hour over, that the babies were crying for 16 hours or something. Don't quote me on those stats, but it was something like that. It wasn't very strong evidence. But they get a lot of mums that are already taking Biogaia, or they have tried Chiara. Anyway, they collect all their data. They get much better results. They only need 1 bottle of Wilby's most of the time compared to 2 or 3 if they're on the other probiotic. And that's what Sharon from Wilby's told me that just recently. So I was like,
that's fantastic.
And I said, can we write this data up? We need to have it as a thing with, looking at getting maybe a PhD student. If anyone knows anyone that wants to do some of this data collection and writing it up, this would be really great, because ideally what that does is just makes health practitioners more confident to prescribe it, and it's more ideally, we would love to do is get it on the PBS list, so that it's not that, so that cost isn't a hurdle, because we know it just has such great results. So any mums that have antibiotics should be given a probiotic. It just should be standard. We should be using them as a preventative medicine instead of just blanket dosing everybody with antibiotics. It's just causing so many downstream problems that no one's that the division of the roles in maternity care, like having an OB that all their job is to get the baby out, the PED, that's all their job is to get them to whatever age, and just to keep them in the growth percentile charts, a lot of
we need somebody with a holistic overview of what's going on.
To look at the whole thing. So, does anyone have any questions before I use up all our time talking, which I tend to do?
No questions here, and I am actually going to have to wind us up. We've got no questions here. I'm all out of questions, and I'm going to have to scoot actually. But
yes, no worries. We'll put all the I'll send you through the links. My contact details there. There's the first 1,000 days program for education. You can register as a health professional with Chiara Probiotics, and there's some free education modules in there that are all accredited by the Australian College of Midwives, soon to be by the New Zealand College of Midwives as well. So and if anyone's got any questions at all or anything, please just email me.
Great. Thank you so much, Emma. Send all that stuff through to us, and I'll pop it up on the Facebook page as well, if you're happy for me to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
The
That'd
links,
be great,
whatever.
Julie. Yeah.
And thank you to everybody for coming in, listening in today. And I think that's our last one for the year. So thanks, Emma, for coming in, being our last guest for the year. And
have a great festive season.
Will be back next year. Thank you. You too. Have a great Christmas, everybody. Thank you so much, everybody. We've got some lovely feedback here for you, Emma. Josie says that was super interesting. Thank you. And Janine says, thank you so much for this amazing information. So thanks so much, Emma. Wonderful.
Awesome. Thank you.
Great. And Mary says, awesome info. Thank you, everybody. See you next year. Bye.
Bye.